Hey everybody, Austin back again with another long play video. This time, as you can see, is going to be Raiden Trad, or Raiden Trad, depending on how you want to pronounce it, for the Super Nintendo. This is going to be interesting. This video, I never really wanted to long play this game because it's really a terrible version of Raiden. So this video is basically going to be me getting through the game and talking about it and some of the differences between this and, say, the arcade version as well as other versions. But it's also going to be sort of kind of showing you how bad this is a version of Raiden. It's so bad. And let's just get into the game, and then I'll just talk and, as we go along and... Oh, this version sucks. Oh. It looks nice when you first start playing, and then the enemies start coming in, and the sound effects start going, and then you just realize, okay, this is not going to be a very pleasant experience of Raiden. Now, Raiden was an extremely popular shoot-'em-up back when it came out, in I think like 1990 or so. And very, very popular shooter. I want to say it was one of the most popular shooters, maybe even of the 90s. And it was just at the beginning of the 1990s. I mean, Raiden took pretty much the best of all the sort of military-style vertical shooters of the last several years, from games like Sky Shark to Twin Cobra, Fire Shark, etc., etc. Pretty much took the best of that, of all those games. Really, really polished the presentation in terms of visuals, in terms of how things animated, in terms of the details when enemies exploded, things like that, to providing a really kind of badass soundtrack that really got you pumped to play the game, to giving you really large, streams of firepower, like the spread shot, which would fill the entire screen. It really was an incredible shoot-'em-up, and to me, it's still one of my absolute favorite shoot-'em-ups of all time, the arcade version. Now, this game got a ton of conversions, and one of them was on Super Nintendo, and they just seriously had to dumb the game down. I mean, just look at this first boss. I killed the first form before he could even come out and fire. Same with the second form. Look at that. That is not supposed to happen. Now, if you crank the game on hard mode, yeah, you might not be able to do that as quickly, but you could still take these guys down really fast, faster than you're really supposed to be able to. Now, that's not to say that the entire game is easy like that. I actually do die a couple of times throughout this playthrough. I believe I do manage to do this without continuing, though. I only die like 2 or 3 times, maybe, because I get careless and reckless in certain cases. But most of the bosses I take down very quickly, despite some of them having more complicated bullet patterns, especially like the second boss, and I'll talk more about this boss when I get there. But the game is just, to be honest, I don't even know why they released it. I mean, probably trying to cash in on the popularity of the arcade game, which was actually a couple years old by the time this version of Raiden came out. But it's just so, I mean, you've got the Genesis version, which, to me, isn't a fantastic version either, but it is a much better version of Raiden than this one is. It is definitely truer to the arcade version. And then you have the TurboGrafx version, which, again, in hindsight, isn't a phenomenal version either, but it's very playable. It's fast-paced. It's truer to the arcade Raiden. There are more enemies in the correct positions and things like that. For instance, on the first stage in this game, there are these sort of tank turrets that are supposed to move in. There's supposed to be 2 of them, right, towards the very beginning of the stage. And in this version, there's only 1 of them. In every other home version, there's 2, just like the arcade version. And, then you look at things like the animation in this game. It's just, there's very little animation on most objects that come down at you. I mean, the helicopters might come down and then turn in 1 frame or 2, and then that's it. It's just, yeah. There's quite a few differences in terms of how damage is dealt as well. For instance, the tanks that you see later on in the game, they end up taking way more hits than they're supposed to. For instance, you can see my spread shot here. It's basically 4 bullets wide, and when you have a spread shot or a firepower that's 4 bullets wide, one of those groups of 4 bullets is supposed to, you know, destroy the turret of a tank, and then it's just moving around. It can't fire at you at that point. And then one more shot, you know, is supposed to kill it. So it's basically 2 hits, and you destroy the tanks. But later on in the game, and even on this next stage, you're going to see it's going to take like 3, 4, 5 hits to destroy the tanks. It's like, that's not how the game is supposed to work. It just feels wrong. If you're familiar with the arcade version of Raiden, it's just, it's such a sloppy conversion. I know this is just sounding like a very negative Longplay video, but I mean, it's just not a particularly good game. Just a heads up, guys, for those that are actually subscribed to my channel, I'd like to do a video sometime soon, actually, where I showcase every single shooter on the Super Nintendo and pretty much rank them from best to worst. And spoiler alert, one of the worst in the system is this version of Raiden. I mean, aside from D-Force and maybe Blazon, which Blazon's actually probably more of a polished game than this is, at least. There's very little on the Super Nintendo that's actually worse than this game. I mean, I'd rather play Darius Twin than play this version of Raiden. I mean, that's just how bad this version is, especially compared to other home versions of Raiden. I mean, I can kind of understand why the Super Nintendo may not have been able to handle the game completely. I mean, Raiden was a game where it can be a lot going on screen at once. I mean, but then again, you look at games like, oh, I don't know, Super R-Type that had extremely detailed backgrounds, constant layers of scrolling, lots of bullets on screen, lots of enemies, and yeah, the game slows down, but I'd rather have a game that slows down like crazy, but still gets all the nice details right, so you still have a game that feels good. Like Super R-Type, tons of slowdown, it's probably one of the worst offenders on the Super Nintendo, but the game still feels, looks, and sounds great. Simple as that. I'd much rather play a game like that that's marred with slowdown than play a game like this that runs fast, but everything else is lacking as a result. I mean, really the only saving grace in this game, and probably the only reason to have a cartridge of this, is the music. This version of Raiden, I have to admit, does make good use of the sound hardware in terms of the music. The sound effects blow. They blow pretty hard, actually, but the music, it's actually pretty good renditions of the classic Raiden music. Unfortunately, when it comes to actually playing the game, they changed the order of the music tracks. For instance, the song that was just playing on the stage was supposed to be the Stage 2 theme. The actual Stage 2 theme in this game was actually supposed to be the Stage 4 theme. Or was it the Stage 5 theme? I don't remember. The next stage theme, I want to say, was supposed to be this stage's theme, or is it the stage after? I don't remember. We'll find out. Now, this is another issue I have with the game, is the boss fire patterns are completely different from the arcade game. Like, this guy isn't supposed to do this. It's just, and it threw me off. It totally threw me off, which is why I just died on that boss. I mean, it's not even like the fire patterns of the bosses are true to the arcade game. It's, Now, in its own right, you know, the fire patterns might be fine, because at these bosses, you actually do kind of have to dodge, which is nice. But you end up going through, like, these long stages with barely anything going on, and then you have to actually finally dodge at the bosses. It's just, it's unbalanced. So yeah, as I was saying, I don't want to trail off too far before, you know, on a different tangent. But like I was saying, the music is actually really solid in this game. You know? So, unfortunately, this game does have a sound test menu. So, I mean, I don't really recommend, if you have an actual Super Nintendo and you like to collect games or something like that, I don't really recommend tracking down this game, this cartridge, unless you are an absolute huge fan of the music to Raiden, like the arcade version or the PlayStation, you know, Jaguar or Genesis or TurboGrafx versions. you know, the soundtrack is really the only saving grace of the game. And I wouldn't even really call that a saving grace now that I think about it. It's one of the only positive elements of this version of Raiden. Now, if you're extremely inexperienced with shoot 'em ups, you might be able to garner some enjoyment out of this game. But honestly, if you're really considering playing this game, just let me convince you to, say, play the Sega Genesis version, the TurboGrafx version, or preferably, if you got a PlayStation or PlayStation 2, pick up a copy of the Raiden Project on the PlayStation. It's a pretty much close to arcade perfect conversion. I mean, there are some minor gameplay differences that only the hardest of the hardcore are going to notice, but you know, for all intents and purposes, it's a perfect arcade conversion to someone like me. That's a more expensive game, but you get both Raiden and Raiden 2, which Raiden 2 wasn't available on any 16-bit console available in America or anything like that. So I mean, the package is worth it for that game alone. So if you really want to try Raiden, you know, how it's really meant to be played, get the Raiden Project or emulate it. You know, simple as that. You could try Raiden Legacy on the PC as well as Android devices, but that's really not the ideal way to play it either. The emulation in that package is kind of crappy. You're just better off running it in MAME if you just want to do emulation. So. Now the next level is the last stage, I think technically on Earth, and I want to say I die here, and I think I die here. No, I don't die here. The boss just stops firing because his turrets are gone. Like, normally, he's supposed to do these big spread shot patterns from the core. So yeah, you can destroy the turrets, but he still throws out these spread patterns, and they're tough to dodge if you're careless. So they're just not even in this version. I mean, maybe they are on like hard mode or expert mode or whatever it is, but I played on stock settings, normal mode, and he doesn't do anything. It's kind of pathetic, really. Yeah, I'm being negative in this long play, but I mean, look at the bullets. They don't even go all the way up the screen. They just kind of like stop, you know, like a centimeter or two away from the top of the screen. It just, what's sad is some of the backgrounds still look okay. You know, you can tell the art, it's close to the arcade version in some regards, you know, which isn't bad. It's missing a good bit of detail still, but you could tell they tried to recreate the arcade backgrounds of Raiden. Like, this part looks fine, which is cool. But everything else is just, Those guys that aren't very familiar with Raiden, you know, might not really understand what I'm really complaining about, but those that are very familiar with the first Raiden know exactly what I'm talking about. Simple as that. Yeah, the stage theme here that's playing in the background is supposed to be the stage 3 theme. So, like, they've completely rearranged where the music tracks are supposed to go. And now, you know, they did that in the Atari Jaguar and PC versions as well. Granted, that was made by a different studio. And those versions are actually better than this version, especially the Jaguar version. That's actually way better than this version. That game also, rearranged the soundtrack order, but to be fair, they added in new tracks as well. So whereas Raiden on the arcade, it would actually regurgitate a lot of the same tracks over and over throughout the course of the game, the Jaguar version and the PC versions, it actually had a couple of extra tracks, so you would actually experience new tracks throughout the course of the game, and it wouldn't be just the same four tracks or so just repeating each other over and over. So that was actually kind of nice, you know, I have to give it props for that. But this one just rearranges the tracks in terms of track order just for grins, you know, it's there's no rhyme or reason. So, you know, if you're an arcade purist, this is definitely not the version of Raiden for you. So when you get your spread shot maxed out, there are instances in the game where you can literally just sit in the center of the screen and just hold down the fire button, and that's it. I want to go ahead and say I use a lot of bombs here. Let's see. Oh man, I didn't even need to touch a bomb. That was just pathetic. That's usually a pretty tough boss for me because it just, especially in the arcade version, he's kind of a little bit lower down on the screen, so the bullets come out and you have little time to react. And the boss takes way more hits in the arcade version, so even if you're maxed out on firepower, it still takes a while. So here we go, this is sort of a little intermission sequence, and this takes us to probably the most stripped down level in arcade to home console conversion history. And those guys that have gotten this far in the arcade version of Raiden will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'll explain myself in just a minute. And you know what I find funny about it is they spent the time to add artwork onto your spaceship here, or your battleship. Looks like it's been like half destroyed and it's been through war. Yet this next stage has no background at all, except for stars in the background. Which is just, you know, you think they would have just used that extra cartridge space or memory to actually concoct some kind of background on this next stage. So there we go, we got stars, right? That's supposed to happen. Okay, that's, you know, this is exactly how the stage started in the arcade version and every other version of Raiden. But yeah, it's just this for the entire stage. Just stars. The entire level. And then get this. They changed the boss of this stage. You fight the stage 2 boss again. That doesn't happen in any other version of Raiden. You don't just repeat bosses like that. I mean, the shortcuts taken in this game at points too, it just blows my mind. This was actually the first time I really revisited this game in a couple of years. And the last time I revisited the game, I didn't even get very far. I got to like level 2 and that's it. And before that, the last time I really played this game was the late 90s. And so I remember from back then just really despising the game, just like being totally unimpressed with it and just wrecking through it on my first try. But I forgot about things like this, like backgrounds being completely missing and them regurgitating the same bosses over. So whereas by this point in the level we were supposed to be basically on the moon, so to say. You know, you see craters, and there's tons of flying ships coming up from behind you, and there's a lot of kamikaze enemies coming from all sides. Those are completely gone. Yeah, it's just, hey, let's just throw more rocks at them. And the rocks seem to take a lot of hits too, so I'm just kind of like, When you look at the homing missiles, they're so lazy in this version as well. They just kind of curve up. In every other version of Raiden, the homing missiles actually home in, like, effectively. They'll actually go up and then spin around. And, oh, they're the kamikaze guys, except they're not coming out from the sides, they're just coming out from the top. I'm liking this background. It's good stuff. Alright. Pressure's on. Oh, wait. I think we fought this guy before. I'm just like, really? I'm just gonna bomb. Just like that. I don't really care that much about my score. You know, in Raiden, you get these medals, and then at the end of the stage, those medals are racked up for a certain amount of points as bonus, and then they're multiplied, that score is multiplied by how many bombs you have in your arsenal. And because there was no ground, like there normally was, there was no way to get medals on that stage. In the arcade version and every other version, there are medals on that stage, but there's none in the Super Nintendo version, just because of how poorly, you know, thought out that level was. So, Like, those guys, there's supposed to be 4 of those guys that come out at once, and they sort of circle around the screen, they all shoot at you, and they take a little while to kill. But in this version, you just get up and you kill them before they can even start firing. I mean... And I want to say I die at this boss. I think I die at this boss. Or I die right before the boss. So... And again, like I said early on in the video, this is not a perfect run or anything like that. Again, my long plays, they usually aren't perfect runs. You know, I try to do as well as I can, but I'm not a perfect player. Unless we're talking Ninja Gaiden or something like that, I am not that phenomenal or great, you know. And I get careless, so... Really what I should have done is just done a Let's Play of this game and just been talking about it live. But I was in a mood to just record a bunch of games the other night, and so I did recorded footage for a lot of several Super Nintendo games kind of in one sitting. So this was one of them. One to mark off the list of long plays and Let's Plays to do. So I have to say, I'm glad they at least retain these enemies. They sort of hide behind these pipes of sort. And, you know, you do have to be a little careful, so I had to give him props for this stage. It's actually done somewhat, you know, it's done some kind of justice, fortunately. Oh, I died there. That was a stupid way to go. Yeah. And that's the fairy. The fairy, they're pretty much hidden items. Hidden power-ups, so to say. And usually there will be a spot in the playfield where your bullets would just start getting absorbed, like disappearing out of nowhere. And those are spots that you have to actually you have to reveal the fairies. And then basically what happens is, if you die, the fairy will come back out and give you a couple power-ups to sort of get you back up on your feet. They're actually very crucial in the arcade version in terms of if you're playing for survival, because if you die in that game, whew, I mean, it gets pretty chaotic. Just a few maybe hell, even the first stage can get pretty crazy. I mean, the arcade version of Raiden, it's a tough game. To be honest, I've never beaten it without continuing or anything like that. I don't even think I've gotten through to... You know, in the past, when I was really in my prime with Raiden, I've probably gotten to the end of stage 6 without continuing, but I've never gotten remotely close to beating the game without continuing. It's the arcade version of Raiden. It's a tough game, very tough, and Raiden 2 is like Raiden on crack. I'd say Raiden 2 is at least 10 times harder than the first one. Much more difficult game. I will never beat that game without continuing. Raiden 2. Raiden 1 I might in the future, but Raiden 2, hell no, that's not happening. So we're basically on the final stage now, and this is probably the most chaotic stage of the game in terms of the Super Nintendo version. There's actually some dodging to be done. Of course, it's not helping that I'm not fully maxed out on firepower anymore, so that definitely hurts my playing ability for sure. Makes me work more. I have to work more. There's a bomb. I actually prefer to stay with the red firepower because, again, it's the spread shot, especially in this version, because the blue firepower, it doesn't spread out, and it's not that much more powerful than the red shot in this version. I mean, there's really no point in playing with the blue firepower unless you want the game to become more difficult for you. I mean, there's always that way to play. Like, oh, well, this game's super easy. Let me play with the blue firepower the whole game. But, you know, in the arcade version, the blue was noticeably more powerful than the red. Even when you would max out the red, every shot looked big, but every shot was weak. So you'd still have to hit enemies a lot. Certain enemies, like the tanks, it was always 2 hits, but The bigger enemies would take a lot longer to take down with the red firepower, even if you were up close. It wasn't really wise to get up close in the arcade version of Raiden. There's a fairy, she just went outside the screen. But in this version, there's just no reason to play with the blue firepower unless you're trying to make the game more difficult. And it's the same thing with the Atari Jaguar version, but that's actually a little bit different. The red firepower is just absurdly powerful in the Jaguar version, so there's no reason to play with the blue firepower either in that one, if you want to make the game easier anyway. Although the blue firepower actually is powerful in the Jag version compared to this one. So, but in this version, just don't ever play with the blue unless you want the game to be more challenging. So that's basically it, guys. It's the Super Nintendo version of Raiden. I know this has been an overly negative long play video, but I mean, you know, the first Raiden is a game I'm actually fairly passionate about in terms of just shooters I played over the years and shooters I've really enjoyed the most over the years. Raiden is one of my absolute favorites, and they just butchered the Super Nintendo version. I mean, like I said, so much so that it's one of the worst on the system. It's one of the absolute worst shoot 'em ups you can get on the Super Nintendo. Which is sad, because Raiden was one of the best shoot 'em ups in the arcade. So it's sad to see it being basically one of the worst you can buy it on the Super Nintendo. So there you go, guys. We've got the credits rolling, basically. You know, like I said, I was overly negative, but let me know your thoughts on this game. Have you played this version of Raiden? What are your thoughts? Do you like it? I mean, can you get over the problems it has? Do you suck at shooters and you like this one because you suck at shooters and it's easy? I mean, some people do like shooters because of that reason. I mean, do any of the issues bother you? Or if you haven't played this version, just from your experience with other versions like the Sega Genesis, the TurboGrafx, or the Jaguar version or something like that, does this version look bad to you or not, based on the other ones you've played? You know, definitely post your feedback in the down below in the comments section. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, but again, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'll be back with some other videos sometime soon. As usual, I'd like to say thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next video. So until then, take care.